Following is a conversation with Rick Mee of the Apple Cup. Rick goes into the history of not only his racing pigeons, but his roller pigeons, and we dive into his one loft race, the Apple Cup. I really appreciate Rick's time, and I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. Thank you. All right, Rick Mee, Apple Cup one loft race. Do you have a loft name that you go by when you're racing?
Uh, yeah, we went by Me Family Loft when we flew in Texas. At least I think I did. One loft racing, just Apple Cup.
Got it. So for those who aren't familiar with you, the AU has every season young birds, old birds. They have rankings. So you have your champion loft young birds, you have a champion loft old birds. Then they have a separate category, which is the President's Cup, where they combine young birds and old bird seasons to give you an overall ranking. And when you were in Texas, I'm up here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, obviously, but when you were in Texas, I saw your name constantly in the top 10 of that President's Cup year after year. You're very tough down there. Um, so not only are you doing now up in Washington the Apple Cup, but you have a rich history of racing at the top of the sheet too.
I didn't know you did your research. I thought this was going to come up during the conversation, but you beat me to it.
No, I
That's cool.
no, I
All
pay
right.
attention to those things, and so I remember seeing that year after year because we were always trying to finish as high as we could as well.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing you guys' name up there before too, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's pause and go back to the beginning for you. How did you get started in pigeons? Was it something in the family? Did you find out about it through a friend? How did you get started in this crazy game, and where did you obtain your first pigeons?
Oh God, that's a long story. I had okay, I'll try to shorten it. So anyway, I started with pigeons when I was 9 years old. I'm 57, so I've had pigeons damn near 50 years, going on 50 years. Um, every day on the way home on the school bus, we lived out in the country. There was a guy that had pigeons that were hanging up on the telephone line, and they were beautiful. They were, come to find out, they were rollers and some crossbreeds and stuff like that. Some of them were banded, many weren't. And uh, I grew up a farm boy. My dad was a foreman on a farm. We were pretty poor. We were dirt poor, believe me, growing up. But dad was a foreman, worked for a guy that had a farm, and he'd pick me up after school all the time. And as soon as the school bus would drop me off, I mean, Dad'd be waiting for me. He'd say, "Hey, get your butt in the truck. Let's go. We got to go to work." And so I'd go to work, and some guys out there that had an adjacent field to us had motorcycles, and I knew these guys, and I was real envious. Every time they drove by, my dad could see, "Oh man, you really want a motorcycle, don't you? You really want a motorcycle?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll pay you 75 cents for every wheel line you move on your own," which is these, the irrigation systems that got the motor in the middle and stuff. And hell, I was only 9 years old back then, and walking through a wheat field, I'd just get drenched in water from the dew up to my waist. And but anyway, he was true to his word. And after school, we did two of them, so that was $1.50 a day. And but on the weekends, we did 14 in the morning, 14 in the evening, so that was $14 a day.
Wow.
And well, whatever that adds up to, I think 50 cents is what he said. So anyway, within just a couple of weeks, I had like 75, $80. And we were pretty dirt poor. I mean, we had free lunch all the way through school.
Was this in
And
Texas?
no, I grew up here in Washington, just
Okay.
10 miles from where I'm at now.
Okay.
And so anyway, so long story short, we pull up in this guy's driveway that has the pigeons, and I'd been looking at his birds for years on the power lines, and I said, "Hey, this is a guy with the pigeons." He goes, "Oh, this is Mr. Martin. I know this guy." I'm like, "Oh, cool." So, I got out of the truck, and my dad went in to go visit him. What they were doing is they were talking about, he was selling them some turkeys. We grew up on a farm. It was like old McDonald farm. I mean, we had 20 different animals. Anything you can imagine, we had it. And so he was negotiating a deal for a turkey to sell Mr. Martin. And I was staring in the pigeon loft, And when Dad got back in the truck 10, 15 minutes later, he goes, "Man, you really like them pigeons, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I see them every day on the way home from school." And we got to driving down the road, and I could see his wheels were turning. You know, my dad's 6'4", 300-pound guy. He's a huge guy. And he says, "Would you rather have pigeons or a motorcycle?" And I don't know what the hell got into me. And I says, "Pigeons." Didn't even think about the motorcycle. I'd probably killed myself if I got into motorcycles. But anyway, got into pigeons, and a couple of them had bands on them. And a couple of them did backwards somersaults. And I was like, "Holy crap, what is this?" And so I started checking out books at the library and found out they were rollers or tumbler pigeons. And I was hooked then. And then about a year and a half later, um, a guy named Mr. What the hell is his name? Warren Newkirk came from California, moved up to Washington State, and he had racing pigeons and he had rollers. And he had been releasing his racers across from our house for like a week. And this was like a 25-mile toss for him, from west to east. And I think it was a Friday evening. And my dad said, "Hey, there's a guy tomorrow that's going to come by here. He's been releasing pigeons out front for a week." And I'm like, "Why in the heck didn't you tell me?" And he said, "Well, I knew you wouldn't sleep. You know, you got to go to school and that sort of thing. You wouldn't." I remember him saying, he said, "You wouldn't have slept a wink if I'd have told you that." So anyway, guy shows up on a Saturday morning and introduces himself. He comes back the next weekend with, God, I don't remember. It was like 100 pigeons, bunch of rollers. If anybody knows anything about Birmingham roller pigeons, they know the name Bill Pensum. He was a famous guy from England that came over to the U.S. and kind of taught the Americans how to fly roller pigeons. And he came the next weekend, and my buddy Donald Weeks, who's into racing pigeons now, he was actually the Evergreen Concourse Federation president up to, I think, last year, and then he gave it up. Now he's his club president, Tacoma Club, which is west of us over in the Seattle area. I'm in Central Washington. And Donald took most of the racers. I kept, I think, 2 pair, and I got all the rollers because he wasn't interested in the rollers. And so we used to send messages back and forth to each other and stuff. And we were only like 2 miles away from each other as the crow flies. And that was a lot of fun. And about when we were 15, we were both probably 9 or 10 years old at this time when this guy showed up, about a year after both of us had started in pigeons. And then when we were both 15, him and I are only 11 days apart. My birthday is March 16th. His is March 5th. So we're really connected. You know, we got a lot in common. Anyway, his dad took us to our first racing pigeon meeting. We wanted to get into racers. And I remember it was at Jerry Heilman's house. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because he sells pigeons on iPigeon. It says Jerry. So that's that. And he's actually a distant cousin of mine.
Oh, wow.
On the Heilman side. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. There was 3 brothers that flew racing pigeons: Jerry Heilman, Bernie Heilman, Kevin Heilman. They all had racing pigeons. They started the club here in the local area. Anyway, we went to his house. We're both 15. I remember this because we weren't old enough to drive. And they started talking about how much clocks cost and you were going to have to train your birds. And I'm like, hell, man, we don't even got driver's licenses yet, you know?
Yeah.
And I can't afford a clock. I think they were talking 100, $125 for a clock or $150 for a clock. I'm like, I can't afford that. So long story short, I stuck with the rollers. Donald got out of pigeons eventually, and then he got back in 8 or 10 years ago, and he's done real well. And I stuck with the rollers and became very well known with the rollers around the world. And then I went in the Army in 1988, retired in 2008 out in Texas. And about 2007, 2008, a friend of mine, Ken Easley, who his wife, he introduced me to my wife.
Oh, wow.
His wife and my wife knew each other growing up in Lubny, Ukraine, a little village, about 65,000 people. And he introduced me to her. So anyway, long story short, we've got married. And his her dad was a pigeon man too, and he actually raced pigeons when he was in Germany. But um, so Ken calls me and says, "Hey Rick," he said, "I understand you're getting ready to get into racing pigeons when you retire from the Army." I said, "Yeah, I've been holding off because I knew that I couldn't do them justice until I could retire. And I'm a competitive guy. I want to do it right. Rollers, you just fly them in your backyard. You don't got to do any traveling, anything. Inexpensive hobby, relatively." And so anyway, he says, "Hey, did you hear about this guy Alphonse Claus?" I'm like, "No, I've never heard of that guy. Who the heck is that?" And he goes, "Well, he's won the World Ace Challenge. He's bred birds that won the World Ace Challenge. He's won the $1 million race. He's bred birds that won the $1 million race." And he said that Alex Beach was importing some birds. Alex is German. He grew up in Germany. Well, I don't remember the whole story. 8 or 10 years old, speaks a little German, and so he was the broker or whatever, the agent for Alphonse Claus. And he brought 8 or 9 pigeons into the U.S. and I ended up getting 2 of them, and Ken got one. The one that Ken got, I think, laid 1 or 2 eggs and petered out, and Ken wasn't very happy about it. So he went and imported a bunch more. And then the day that they arrived, or the day after they arrived, we were there at his house. It was in July. God, I can't remember when that was, 2008 or something, 2009. But went there and picked up, I think, 4 pair. So I picked through, I got what I wanted, and Ken kept what he wanted. And then I took off from there, and started breeding the racers. And right after I retired from prior to that, I bought 1 pigeon from Dave Clausing. It was off a Never Say Die bird that won the $1 million race. And the father was Breezy, who was 99th in South Africa, and his nestmate brother was 101st. So I thought, man, that's some pretty good genetics there,
Mm-hmm.
And so I took that Klaus bird and I crossed it in with those the Clausing bird off of Never Say Die with the Alphonse Klaus birds, and I kicked butt when I was in Texas. The first year I flew, the guys in the combine used to say, "Oh, that's that roller guy over in Copper's Cove, Texas. That's the roller guy. He's the new flyer. Don't worry about him." Well, after the first race, I finished second through 10. I would have been first, but one of the guys in my club, I had been training his pigeons for him. His name was Jerry Hilliard. He passed away a couple years ago. Nice guy, great guy in Belton, Texas. I was training his pigeons because he was recovering from cancer. So I'd go every morning, go pick his birds up. This guy's 25 miles away, and I'd train him for him. And so I saw this big grizzlecock land with mine, and I knew that it was windy in the morning and it had died down to nothing. So I knew that if I scared this bird off the loft, this guy was going to beat me.
Yeah.
Because all my birds had just clocked. And I said, let me do the right thing. I'm going to scare this bird off the loft. So I spooked it off the loft. And sure as hell, that guy won the race. And I came in second to 10. Well, then after that, I think I won every club race there was the rest of the season, or came close to it. And won, champion loft. I had the champion bird, all that stuff. And then the next year in the combine, I started rising to the top. I was flying a small team, and that was the year that I ended up winning the president, or second in the President's Cup. Had I kept my mouth shut on what I was doing, I probably would have won the President's Cup. Butch Shoup was friends with Don Barker, and they were part of Quest Syndicate. And Danny Rogers was the loft manager for Don Barker in Austin, part of Quest Syndicate. And Don was a wealthy guy, a millionaire, had a roofing company and everything, Barker Roofing. Anyway, Danny would call me every morning because he took a liking to me. He said, "Hey, Rick, where you at? What you doing?" I said, "Dude, I'm out 60 miles training the birds, waiting for the sun to come up, and I'd wait for the sun to barely start showing a little orange before you could even see it, and I'd release the birds." And I trained them, Jeff, a lot. I really trained them a lot. And anyway, make the story short, I kicked ass. I did real well. I was second in the President's Cup. That one year I was what was I, second middle distance, fourth or fifth long distance, second all distance, and then I was second in the President's Cup, and had one of my birds finish real high in the tops, the top pigeons, and then I moved out here to Washington State. Um, I was retired at that time for a couple of years. Been racing in the Central Texas Combine, was really doing good, and my son was in college playing baseball. My daughter had went in the Air Force, and we had a young one. My wife and I were both married before. I had a son, she had a daughter, and my son now is in Alabama. He's 32. Sasha's in the Air Force. She's in San Antonio. She's 30, and then Angelina's 20. She's home for the summer now. She'll be 21 in November. But anyway, yeah, I just took off. So anyway, I wanted to move back home because my whole family's from here. This is where I
Right.
grew up. This is where I was born and raised, and I wanted her to have cousins. My brother had twins, boy and a girl, that were a year older than her. I wanted her to have cousins. I wanted her to have a
Sure.
grandparents.
Right.
I wanted her to have aunts and uncles, cousins, all that stuff, which we all had out here. We had nobody in Texas. It was just
Right.
friends, which they were great people. And then I came out here, and the guys tried to give me a bunch of young birds to fly, old birds. I mean, young bird series starting in September. Well, I got here like in June, and they wanted to give me young birds, and I said, nah, that's not going to work. And I really want to fly my own pigeons to test them. I don't want to test your birds. So I raised a late round in August and October, and got them loft flying around the property and doing all the things just like we all know how to do. Got them flying real good, and told the guys I was going to fly them as old birds next year. And they're like, "Well, you can't do that. You never flew them as young birds." I said, "That's not necessary. Watch, I'll do it."
Right.
And anyway, to make a long story short, again, I kicked butt. I was what, fifth middle distance in the AU, 24th long distance, fifth all distance. I had the top long distance bird in Washington State. It was ninth in the AU. That same pigeon was first all distance racing pigeon digest, and he was second long distance racing pigeon digest, and he was only beaten by a bird in my combine that I was flying against every week, a guy named Paul Meyer. He's a very good long distance flyer. So I flew for a couple more years, and I did really, really well. And you know how you've heard the stories, Jeff, where if somebody does really, really, really good, they they get upset. And so the accusations start. And I was
Right.
like, guys, I don't have time for this crap. If you're going to accuse me of cheating or something, then I'm just going to start a one loft race. And that's what I did. Um,
One of my
yeah.
one of my good buddies, I'm not going to name names, but he's going through that and he's been through it before. And so it's common in the sport, unfortunately, when someone's doing so well. And I guess, like Mike Gannis says, nobody likes a winner. Uh,
Well, it's funny you mentioned his name because I talked to Mike. Mike used to put pigeons in my race all the time. He doesn't now. And for whatever reason, that doesn't bother me at all. We're still friends. And we talked on the phone one time, and he said, Rick, when I was a young man, I dominated in my club or combine, and they basically made him feel unwanted, and he quit, or he decided to quit. Another guy, Gary Nelson in Texas, he was in the same combine as I was before I got there, and he was the dominant flyer. Same thing. They kind of made him feel unwanted, so he left. There was another guy, Al Corey, out in Indiana, went by Lazy AC Loft. He died a couple years ago. Really great guy. I've got one of his pigeons in my loft. One average speed our first year, outstanding hen. Same thing. He did so well that they zoned him out. So
yeah,
it's unfortunate because there's a lot of clubs that the conversation on the street is that we have a dying sport here,
but yet
and
they're willing to kick people out.
they want new members in their clubs, but then when you get in there, if you do too well, then they don't like you.
Right.
And it shouldn't be that way. It should be, there's an old, iron sharpens iron. If you get some guy who's a really, really good flyer, guy or gal, you should welcome that because it puts you on the top of your game and makes you a better competitor yourself. You know.
Absolutely. Yeah, in the 90s, my dad and my oldest brother flew for a few years. but they're actually voted out of the club they were in for doing too well. And my dad had to
Mhm.
join a new club. But think, my dad always said, I understand if they want to vote me out, but why would you do this to a teenager? Why would you vote a teenager out? So stuff like that. One of the reasons I do this interview process with people is to try to help the sport, to try to raise awareness to new flyers and even people who are experienced just wanting to get help. So I, of course, appreciate you coming on and doing this because I think the more we communicate, the better it is for the sport overall. Um, I want to go back though. When you were 9, 10, 15 years old and you were doing your rollers, did you have to kind of makeshift a loft together? Did you have to build it yourself? Where were you storing these birds back then?
my dad, my dad. So the money that my dad owed me for working on the farm, I told you about moving the sprinklers on my own and all that stuff. That was short lived because he realized, hey, he's making too much money. We can't afford this. So he bought a bunch of 2x4s and big chicken wire, the 2.5-inch chicken wire, and he built me like this little triangular, well, it was like hexagon loft on the side of the chicken pen. It didn't even have a roof on it. It just had wire. It was just all wired and a door. And so no places for the birds to perch or nothing. So I took an old dresser and put it on the wall. I think he helped me put it on the wall. And that's where the birds kind of perched on top. And then eventually I put perches in there. And then I remember raising my first baby, man, I was just ecstatic. Um, but yeah, I had some pretty dilapidated looking pigeon lofts back in the day. I took over. I mean, we raised all kinds of animals for meat to sell so that we could survive.
Right.
We were poor kids, but we probably ate better than anybody in school
Sure.
because my dad was a big man and he believed in meat, vegetable, potatoes, bread, and milk every single night. So
Right.
so we raised rabbits to butcher, chickens, turkey. We had a garden. It was like an acre. We all that stuff. Anyway, my pigeon lofts were pretty crappy, but then when I was in the army, I moved around a lot. And I've flown pigeons, I think, in 13 different locations around the country. And I think I've had about 15 different, well, if you count, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lofts out there now, counting the race loft. So I've had 20 some lofts. So over the years, I've gotten to be a better carpenter. And this loft out here, I built every single square inch of that on my own, believe it or not. I mean, I was, the county, when I got a permit to do it, they wanted me to put these big 4 by 12 uh, 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 what do you call them? Big support beams for the rafters, and I'm lifting them up on my shoulder and putting them on one ladder and sticking them in place. But yeah, we got some pretty decent lofts now, but it's taken a long time
Right.
to get to this point.
And
And
so,
I still compete with the rollers. I mean, that's my first love. It always will be. I started that when I was a little boy. I'm
yeah,
considered one of the better flyers in the world, and all that stuff. We have a master flyer program. I was the first one to get that. We have, and then we have a couple of us that are 2-time master flyers. And then there's about 3 or 4 of us that are 4-time master or 3-time master, 2-time master flyers and 3-time. There's only 30 some master flyers in the whole world. And a handful of us have got it twice. And then there's like 3 or 4 of us that got it. There's 4 of us that got it 3 times. So you got to accumulate like 2,200 points or whatever it works out to, 2,250. And 2 of the guys that were at the top, they're deceased now. And so it's basically me and this other guy that are neck and neck between who's the top roller flyer in the world. I've got the way those competitions work is, I don't want to go too much into rollers, but you travel around the country. This is for we have in the spring, we have what we call the World Cup fly. There's 15 different countries that fly. Europe flies, Canada, all US, um, South Africa, all over the place. And we all compete in our regions. And then whoever the champion is in the region gets to represent us in the finals where, well, I won the region or qualified for the region, and I fly Saturday for the finals. And if I do well, then I'm back number 1 as the top roller flyer in the world, which is
that's
kind of important
incredible.
because I'm a competitive dude.
Yeah, absolutely. I am as well. So it's happening this Saturday.
I'll fly my birds in the finals. The judges from Canada, and we're flying him all around the world.
That's
Uh, he'll
incredible.
he'll finish up here in North America, and then he'll go to Europe and South Africa, Australia. He's got to go to the UK, Ireland, everywhere. It's pretty
So
cool.
what?
I've been offered that trip several times, but dude, when I was in the army, I had to travel a lot, and I
Yeah,
just don't. I don't care to travel like that. You
you
know, it's
you had enough moving
two.
around.
It takes 2 months to travel, do the whole thing, and I don't want to be gone for 2 months. I like being home. I'm a homebody now. I'm almost 60. I like messing with my pigeons.
Yeah, me
I
too.
run this one loft race, so
So what does a roller competition look like for those that aren't familiar? What is Saturday going to look like for you? How do you win? How do you do well?
we fly 20 of them at a time. You got 5 minutes to call time in. So when they get up to a good elevation and they look like they're going to work pretty good, you call time in, and then they're on the clock for 20 minutes. They're in judgment for 20 minutes. You have to have 5 of them roll simultaneously to score any points. They have to roll 10 feet or more. The faster and the cleaner and the deeper they roll, the more bonus points you get at the end. So you have to have a minimum of 5 rolls simultaneously to score any points. And then it's a point, for 5 to 9, it's 1 point. 10 to 14, it's 2 points. 15 to 19 is 3 points. And a full turn of 100, or I mean, of 20 birds is 100 points. Nobody ever does that. I don't think anybody's ever even scored that
Right.
legitimately, but it can happen. I've seen it happen, or I'm so critical of my birds, I can never give them credit for it, but
Right.
it's come close several times where there's 18, 19, 20 birds rolling at the same time. So that's how that works. It's a lot of fun. Um, we've had a lot of racing pigeon people who have switched into rollers for political reasons or whatnot, or they got tired of the road training. And then we've got a lot of roller guys that have got into racers. A lot of people that are in my race, they have both breeds.
Yeah, that's
And so
great.
when I first started this business in 2015, the Apple Cup, I got quite a few birds that first year because people already knew me.
Right.
They would call and say, "Hey, are you that famous roller guy that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's
Right.
me." And so they already knew I was a pigeon person through and through. And so I got quite a few birds, and of course, over the years, it's grown. So
That's incredible. And good luck on Saturday. We'll have to
thanks.
announce how it goes for you. Hopefully you can get to the top there. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, I got to beat old Don Olette, and he was in California, and then the Falcons started hitting him, and he went to where the hell did he go? He went to Hawaii, and then that didn't work out very good. So now he's in Idaho, and he's my number one competition.
So it's going to
So
come down
it's fun
between
to
you
have
two.
somebody. When you have somebody like that, it pushes you.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
got to
Yeah.
have somebody to push you.
As you said, iron sharpens iron there.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in the army, you're out of the army, and I assume you were in Texas at that time and decided then to build the loft for racing pigeons, homing pigeons.
Yeah.
What was the loft build that you did? Was it flying to a perch? Were there nest boxes? Give us a little rundown on what the loft was like that set you up to have so much success, because that's a big part of good racing is a good loft, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The loft faced south like it's supposed to. It was a small loft. It was 12 by 12. It was divided down the middle. So you'd walk in, well, let's put it this way. You'd walk in the east end, and that would take you into the cock section. And there was an aviary out for the cocks and the hens, both of them, but they couldn't see each other. I set it up where they couldn't see each other at all. Solid wall between the cock section and the hen section. All right. And there was a sliding door so that I could go back to the hen section. The cocks had nest boxes, the hens just had perches. So I flew a variation of celibacy. I flew celibacy before I even knew what the word celibacy meant as far as racing pigeons. I just said, "Oh, this will work." Hell, I know
Right.
how to motivate pigeons. I've been doing it my whole life. So when I took them out on training tosses, I'd release the hens first, and I'd wait about 20 minutes. I'd release the cocks because the hens will fly home for love of the loft, and the cocks come home because they want to have sex. And
Hmm.
if they know those hens are hanging out there, they're going to race home to them. And so I would do that. And then when I come home, they would all be, being chummy and everything in the cock section. Some of the hens didn't have a mate, but they were mated to each other. Or some of the cocks had two or three hens, which was fine by me. And then I would just come home and I would drive them all into the hen section. And then I would push them out into the aviary where I could easily just grab the cocks, put them on their side, and I'd separate them real quick. It only took me a few minutes. Man, they got so used to me, they just like kind of walk up to me. They said, "Okay, Daddy, we know the deal. Fun time's up." They'd walk up to me, and I'd throw them to the other side, slide door, throw another one in there. And so I flew a relatively small team, but I was real successful with that. And so then right before races, I would show the hens to the cocks in the hallway. So I had a front hallway, and then I also had a dividing wall, so I could section the birds off into a small contained area for. So I'm not chasing them around. That's one thing I noticed when I first got into racing pigeons. What I did was I went in the AU national database. I used to be a database junkie. I
Yeah.
scan that ad all the time. Who do I need to beat? So I looked up all the top flyers in my combine that were consistent for the last 5 years. That's what I did. And there were 3 or 4 guys, and I went around and visited them, and all of them were very similar in what they did compared to people that I've met since and before. They're just very professional. They're almost OCD to a point. They're very attention to detail oriented type people, professional people. And I learned a lot from them. And I said, okay, I just got to emulate what they're doing, and I got to do more. If I do 10% more, I'll beat them. And then I went around to the people that weren't winning, and you go in their lofts, and their lofts were dirty, and the birds were flying around scared, and they're trying to chase them with a net to put them in a crate. And I'm like, that's stupid. And their trays were always full of feed. And I'm like, well, this is easy. I'm going to, so 90% of the guys already, in my mind, already had beat. I just had to figure out how to beat that top 10%. And then out of the top 10%, there was only maybe the top 3 to 5%. We had a good sized combine in Central Texas. We had 4 clubs and about 55 flyers. So on some races, we'd get close to 1,000 birds and 55 flyers, and it was a lot of fun. It was very competitive.
Oh yeah.
But it was very, very different from flying out here compared to there. Trust me,
Yeah.
huge difference. I very, very rarely lost any birds in Texas. Very rarely. The only thing you had to contend with was heat and wind.
Right.
Out here, it was a wake up call. You got mountains, valleys, ridge lines, the Columbia River, which is my biggest crux. I mean, let me tell you, in my one loft race, especially, one club racing wasn't a problem because you have a small group of birds coming across. But when you try to get a couple thousand pigeons across the river for the first time, that's a challenge, dude. That's not hard. That's not easy. And I've talked to a lot of people that have one loft races, and some of them were real successful, and they've all said the same thing, that when they were earlier in their careers, when they had to fly over bodies of water, they know how tough it is. So they kind of sympathize with me. But so this course has its challenges. They fly over the desert part of the time. They fly over
Right.
mountains. They fly over the forest. I mean, But those that aren't afraid of a tough course, they'll send pigeons here, and we'll lose some birds before the final. But generally, I can't remember what my percentages is. 81, 82%, might even be higher of birds that return from the final race, which is a pretty big accomplishment on this course.
Absolutely. And I want to transition into the one loft side of things, but I want to go back to Texas
Yeah.
when you were competing. So you told us a little bit about your motivational system. So what about training and feeding? What were you using product wise? What were you doing in the water, the feed? Were you doing anything in particular that you felt gave you that edge?
Uh, I've often told people that if you're really, really good at training pigeons and motivating them, you could give them just straight water and a straight general pigeon mix, and you'd probably beat 90% of the guys.
Yeah.
But knowing a little bit about nutrition, feed, manipulation, motivation. You can really bring out the best in a pigeon. That's why club racing, combine racing is a lot different than one loft racing. One loft racing is just a genetics test. Club racing, I mean, I'm not being braggadocious, but I had guys, and I had a guy up the road that when I was in Texas, and he gave me some birds from a flea market, and I won out to 250 with those birds just because I was really good at conditioning them. But anyway, um, God, what did I do? I didn't do a lot. I mean, to be honest with you, water. Um, I don't even think I was using Primalac for pigeons back then when I was in Texas. I started out here. I love that product. I use it every single day now. I wish I'd have discovered it. But what was I putting on the feed? There's one oil that's a really good oil that you've I'm sure you know about. It's called Kickin' Chicken
I've heard
or
of that.
Fat Cat.
Hmm.
It's the same product, or not, Healthy Coat for horses, or Kickin' Chicken for poultry. It's the same exact product, and you can buy it at any Tractor Supply. And I was putting that on the feed, and then there was another product called Fat Cat, which has 21 amino acids in it. At least it did when I was using it. I haven't used it since I was here because, one loft race, I'm not trying to do special things for certain birds, and I don't have time. I mean, I'm going through 5 bags of feed a day. I don't got time to put crap on all the feed. So everything
Right.
I add goes to the water and goes in the water. And so I was using that Kickin' Chicken / Healthy Coat, same product, as an oil on the feed when I was racing in Texas, and out here also when I was club racing. And I'd put that Fat Cat on there, which had all the amino acids in it and stuff, and the vitamins, minerals, and everything. And that's all I was doing. Nothing other than that. Seriously, nothing. Oh, one thing I would do the night before uh, shipping night. So we shipped on Friday and we raced on Saturdays. Is I would take raw Spanish peanuts and chop them up in a coffee grinder, because if you just put them in the feed, then you see the cockbirds taking them real quick. If you're feeding the cocks and hens together, which I didn't. But even if you just put the peanuts in there, you'll see that certain hens will take them and the other ones won't. And same thing with the cocks. They'll fight all the other cocks for those peanuts. So I got smart and just chopped them all up and made them into little chunks, or little bitty pieces, almost into a powder. And then I would put that on the feed and mix that with the oil and the Fat Cat, which is the amino acids that's designed for horses. And that's all I did. Nothing other than that.
And then you
Oh, and I
said,
added a little hemp seed too.
yeah.
A little bit of hemp. I'll tell you a funny story. There was a guy, he was a mile away from me. He was from Sri Lanka. And most of the Sri Lankans are in the Sri Lankans and what's the other country that's India,
Hmm.
Sri Lanka, the right thing. Okay. So they fly tipplers. So I came over to this guy's house, and he picked up some of these flea market racing pigeons. They might have been the best bred birds in the world. Hell, I don't know. But he got them from a flea market, couple bucks a piece. And he was flying with his tipplers, and he had those racing pigeons flying for 3 and 4 hours. And he was feeding them like tipplers. He was feeding them lots of millet, lots of rice, stuff like that. And I said, man, okay, well that works.
Right.
And so I always had a lot of millet in my feed, and just like my race mix that I use for the one-off race, it has millet in it, sunflowers, black sunflower seed, lots of safflower, tons of safflower. And that's one of the ways you get your birds to go up high,
Yeah, absolutely.
But one thing I'll mention, because I'll probably forget, but one of the tricks I had when I was in Texas, some of the guys said, hey, we've never been able to get our birds to fly more for 45 minutes. And one guy said an hour. Well, I had my birds flying for an hour and 20 every morning. No problem. No sweat. The hens would. Once the cocks, even the young cocks, once they figured out the celibacy system, then they didn't want to fly as long as I wanted them to. They'd fly like maybe 45 minutes. Old cocks would fly like 20, 25 minutes. They'd drive me nuts.
Yeah.
So what I did is I'd kick the hens out first, knowing that they were going to fly for an hour, 15 hour and 20 on their own. And then before they landed, I'd kick the cocks up. And of course, the hens are excited because they get to see the cocks, and the cocks are excited because they see the hens. So that would make the hens fly for another 25 to 30 minutes, and the cocks would get at least a half an hour. So my
Yeah.
hens were flying for about an hour and 45 to an hour and 50 a day, just loft flying. This not even talking about road training, because I do that in the morning. And another thing I did, and the cocks were getting some condition on them. And another thing I did too is right before they got ready to land, I'd kick out a kid of rollers. So the rollers on the other side of the property, about 50 yards away, they'd go up, and that'd spook the racers a little bit, and then they'd pull the racers up. So man, sometimes I was getting almost 2 hours of loft flying on the racers. And on some of those days, I was actually doing 50, 60 miles in the morning too. So they were getting a lot of flying.
What days?
Guys don't, they don't think that these birds need that much training. Maybe for old birds you don't, but I can tell you this: a friend of mine, Arnold Swain, he had the top long distance loft in the AU a couple of years ago, and he lived right here close to me. He was a good friend of mine, and Jerry Heilman, who I told you about, goes by Mary and Jerry's Loft. Mm-hmm. Distant cousin of mine, wanted Arnold to help him train his pigeons, because this before Jerry, retired a few years ago, and but he was way short of us. So to get any real distance on him, on his birds, you had to go across the river. And anyway, long story short, it was 100-mile toss for Arnold if he took his own pigeons, but it was only like 50 miles for Jerry, which is what he wanted. He wanted the 50-mile toss. So Arnold was training his birds 100 miles a day, or at least 3 times a week, he told me. And that's the year that he had the top long distance loft in the country. Another one that comes to mind is Bill Weema up in Canada. Mm-hmm. Had the top young bird loft one year in Canada. And he had a partner that was 90 miles away. And they were in different clubs. And so they would meet halfway, 45 minutes each, every day after work. And they would exchange birds and bring them back to each other's location, because it was just kind of ironic that they were both on each other's fly paths, but they were flying different directions in different clubs. So Bill's birds were getting 90 miles a day. And the other guy was too, but the other guy wasn't as good at feeding and all that stuff. But
right.
That's when Bill had one of the top lofts in I think he had the top loft in Canada, in the CU. So it just goes to show that these birds can do more than than we think they can. But you also have to be smart with nutrition and stuff. You don't want to wear them out.
Right.
You can't. The thing about racing, pigeon flying, period, rollers, racers, tipplers, whatever it is, you can write it all down on a piece of paper and say, this is what I'm going to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But you have to be willing to adjust based upon what you see. And not everybody can do that, because some people are really good at that, reading an animal, and some are not. But if you got that part down, it really helps you a lot.
Oh, absolutely.
Setting birds up for races and stuff, if we're talking racing pigeons.
So during an ideal week for you, when you were down there in Texas, you would do the loft flying, as you already explained, but when were you taking them on tosses? Did you have a structure as far as, I want to do 2 a week, 3 a week, every day? What was it that you were trying to do? Because I agree with you that old birds may not necessarily need quite as much road training, but young birds, the more you road train, the better the results, it seems.
Yeah, let me try to remember exactly, because there was a guy in my combine, a good friend of mine, I hope he watches this, Frank Perez, a little Cuban guy. he calls me Poppy. So I kind of give him some techniques, and he was really upset a couple of weeks ago. I went to visit him. He said, this guy keeps beating me by 1 second or 2 seconds or 5 seconds or whatever. And so I told him to do what I'm about ready to tell you. And basically, we were racing on Saturdays. And so on Saturday, they would race. And then Sunday, they would get a day off, which was bath time, the loft fly, whatever. Monday, same thing. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I was down the road 60 miles. I was releasing them before the sun came up. And I did that 3 days in a row, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Friday was basketing day. They do not go out of the loft.
Right.
That's my day to set them up. That's my day to get in there, feed them suckers early, early, early in the morning. If it's a short race under 300, they're going to get like half a feeding, and I want that feed totally digested before they race. I see a lot of when when you go to a club, um, in our club, you used to have to handle everybody else's birds. You didn't just handle your pigeons. You handled everybody's birds, and some of them were completely full of feed.
Their crops full. You can feel it.
Yeah, and I'm like, why is your birds full of feed when they're flying 100 and some mile race in the morning? It's not necessary. There's only one time. There's only one time that I would feed my birds heavily before shipping, and that's when we do what I call a 2 day ship. If you're going to do a 500 mile or 600 mile race or whatever, like on a Sunday, and you're shipping on Friday and they're going to be on the trailer for that long, I do not want my birds eating what everybody else's birds are eating, because when you put them on the trailer for that long, they just kind of equalize. Well, I want to keep the edge because I've been putting all the hard work into these birds, training and manipulation and feeding and motivation, all this stuff. And so what I would do is I'd feed them real heavy on the day of shipping if I knew it was going to be a 2 day ship. So
Right.
that my theory was that the next morning when they went to feed them on the trailer, my birds wouldn't eat, or they'd eat very, very little. And then on Sunday, they're completely cleaned out and boom, they're going to come home and shoot. The last race that I raced in Texas, I shipped 5 pigeons and I was 1, 2, 3, and 4 in 20th. And had that pigeon that came in 20th finished 5th or 6th or a little higher, I would have won the President's Cup. That same weekend, Butch Shoop in the Denton Club north of me was racing. He flew 5 pigeons and he came in 1 through 5.
Wow.
So he won. He had 155 points that year. I had 150, and everybody else was like in the teens, in the top 10.
Right.
110, 115, whatever. You guys might have been in there too. I don't remember.
Yeah, I'd have to
Um,
look back at what year that was, but
Yeah, but dude, I didn't even know what the President's Cup was until Don Barker at Quest Syndicate, his loft manager, came to me and said, "Hey, you're in contention for the President's Cup." I'm like, "What is that?"
right.
He's like, "Well," he said, "Dummy, you were flying in young bird. See, it's a combination. People that don't know, it's a combination of young bird and old bird results back to back.
Right.
So your young birds the fall prior to your old bird season the next spring, early summer. So but in young birds, I was flying like 55, 60 birds. If I'd have known how the President's Cup works and the way the points are awarded, I wouldn't have been flying all my scrubs. I would have flown my best birds. I would have flown them in 2 different races. I was just loading up the A race because it was unlimited. The B race was, I think, 5, and the C race was 1 pigeon. They did that for just gambling purposes in the
Sure.
past. A, B, and C race. So had I known how the President's Cup one worked, I would have been putting my top 5 pigeons in that B race, and I would have easily won the President's Cup. But I didn't know how it worked, and I was just flying pigeons, having fun.
Yeah. No, I
It
mean
was it
you
was good.
flew
It was
incredibly.
good to be retired. It was good to be retired, not have a regular job, and just be able to get up, mess around with pigeons, and I was just enjoying life, and it was a good time.
So, um, whenever you decided that you were going to race, you got obviously pigeons um, that you combined. You had combined a couple of different families crossing each other. Did you have a certain style of pigeon that you liked, that you preferred on your race team, or did you let the road kind of tell you what you had, or what was the strategy behind kind of having your team of elite birds that you say you would send your 5? Did you have a certain system of evaluation that you looked at to decide who those 5 would be?
Yeah, well, our race season was real long in Texas, so we had a lot of races to pick from. And same thing out here in Washington. I don't remember old birds. I think they have 8 or 9 races, but what I would do prior to the season starting, it was just kind of a gut check on which pigeons went on the unlimited race, which is the A, which ones went on the B, which was I think 6 pigeons max, but I was putting 5 in because from what I understood and was told, that's how the AU computed. You had to have a minimum of 5
Five,
birds.
right?
I never entered the C race because it was just kind of a waste of time for me for one. But so prior to the season starting, it was just kind of based upon what I felt by observation, training tosses, stuff like that. But once the races started, Jeff, what I would do is I would put the predominance of the birds would be in that A race, right? And then the B race was released 30 minutes later. And it was just kind of like being a coach, like an NBA coach. I would look at the results and I was constantly changing birds on that main team, which is my top 5 birds, because those are the ones I was going after for points for AU awards.
Right.
And so I just, I would look at races the week prior and say, okay, who's kicking butt? Who looks good? And and I would go in the loft late at night when the birds were totally resting, and I'd go in there with a dim flashlight and look at their droppings.
Yeah.
I'd say who's got the best looking droppings, and if a pigeon looked a little off, then I could almost guarantee I'd go in there late in the evening and the droppings were soft or runny or something bacterial issue or something going on. Um, so um, so yeah, that's all I did is I flew the most of the pigeons in the unlimited race, and then was able to pick out the best and just my develop a team of 5 pigeons that were just kicking butt. But that year that I won the President's Cup, I think I also in the combine I won average speed, master loft. What other awards are there?
Champion
Master
bird,
loft.
maybe.
I do champion bird. I think I had the top 9 or 10 champion birds, and then I think Bobby Dvorsky had one bird that was 10th, and then I had like a whole bunch more. And then that's when they said, "Hey, we got to get rid. We got to do something with this guy." And and there was a meeting that they had. I couldn't go to it. It was like the summer meeting or whatever after Old Birds or whatnot, and they were talking about wanting to zone me out, which didn't make any sense because I was right in the middle of the combine. It's like
Yeah.
not like I had an advantage over everybody. The funny thing is we would fly east one year and west the next. And when we flew east, I was on the long end by about 15 miles and I won average speed. And when we flew west and I was on the short end by about 15 miles, I still won average speed. So at the meeting, they were like, well, we need to do something about this guy. He must be in a certain spot or whatever. So we're going to change things up, change the direction, all that stuff. And I remember Bobby, what the hell was his, not Bobby Dvorsky, but Danny Rogers, the loft manager for Quest Syndicate, stood up and he was kind of pissed. He said, look, I talk to this guy every day. He's always out training his pigeons. He beat you fair and square. We shouldn't be trying to pull all this BS. And then besides, he's leaving and going back to Washington in 2 weeks. So they kind of had egg on their face. They tried to change the rules because of me, but then I was moving anyway and they didn't know it. So, I kind of have a hard, probably shouldn't mention it like this, but it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. When somebody does really, really good, they try to find a reason to kind of kick them out or push them to the side. And you got clubs that are begging for flyers, but they don't want good flyers. They want mediocre flyers so they can keep beating up on them. It makes them look better. It's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
they want more flyers and more birdage so their birds can have more birds to fly against, but they don't want you at the top of the race sheet.
Yeah.
I certainly, if I was moving to Texas during the time you were there, my goal would be to dethrone you there. And how do I go about it? What do I have to do,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah, that's
so
that's what makes us better, dude. I mean, and you develop better pigeons that way too,
yeah,
and
exactly. And so
you
you
know,
have to do the details, which I think is really important. You were talking earlier, and I've put this in some of my previous videos about analyzing the droppings and studying the droppings, because if you have a if you have a team made up of, let's just say, 80 pigeons, it's very hard to keep an eye on each dropping because you have so many birds. But like you said, you had such a nice small team of birds. You knew each bird, you knew what their droppings look like whenever they're healthy and they're in form, and you knew immediately there's something off here. And when you have
Yeah.
that ability to notice those things in their health, that gives you a big leg up because you're ahead of any problems that might arise health wise.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's some things that we think we know that we probably don't. There's one thing that you cannot see within the pigeon, and that's its drive and the motor inside the bird. You can't see that. Um, I had a big Kloss cock, a big mealy bar cock bird. He was huge, and he kept coming home late on the short races, and he had mud on his feet. And I'm like, this stupid bird's going down to drink, and I was getting pretty pissed about him. And then I had training tosses, and he was kind of coming home a little later. And I remember calling it was on a Wednesday, and I called my buddy Tony up in Canada. I said, dude, I'm not flying this bird on my team anymore. He's just pulling my percentages down. And he goes, bro, I got a good feeling about this bird. And this, well, I pulled him off the team early in the week, quit training him. And then, shipping night came around on Friday, and he goes, you need to ship that bird. And I'm like, I'm not shipping that damn bird. That bird hasn't been trained. He's been eating all he wants. He's fat as a pig. He goes, train, fly that bird. Long story short, I was in the middle of the combine. And when we had wind out of the south, it benefited the guys up to the north in Waco. When the wind was blowing out of the north, it would benefit the guys in Austin down south. And we were in the middle. And so we had a really, really strong north wind this week. And anyway, my buddy talked me into putting this bird on in the race. And I said, okay, I'll put the bird in the race just to make you happy. And the wind's blowing out of the north. And my bird, so the birds were released out of the east, and they had to fly across the wind the whole time. So with the guys that were down in Austin, it would push their birds down to them a little bit. The guys to the north up in Waco, they didn't really stand a chance. And us in the middle, we didn't really stand a chance either, because most of the birdage was down in Austin. That was the big club. And we just had small clubs. And anyway, long story short, my pigeon was the first bird in the northern section. And it was this big red barcock. And I think he was fourth. The only birds that beat him was just like by a minute or so down in Austin. And so, you talk about horses for courses. Sometimes when you get a really, really windy day, you don't want to fly these little bitty buoyant hens because they just get blown all over the damn place. You
Right.
get these big, strong pigeons. They'll
Right.
fight right through the wind, and that's exactly what he did. And let me tell you what, dude, that bird. So the next year, I was mating my birds up, and I was short one cock, and I said, I'm gonna try this cock. So I put him on a small little Jansen hen, and bred me the best cockbird I ever raised. He was a nice, buoyant little cock, and he was just an ass kicking pigeon. He was second in the comp. I had the top 9 or 10 champion birds in the combine, and he was second behind his mate. His mate 2647. I raced her 9 races, and she was in the top 5% every race. And the only races where she wasn't number 1 or 2 or 3 was when she was beat by loft mates. And she turned out to be a really good breeder.
Yeah,
Super
and
pigeon.
that's always great to see. It just takes that certain race for certain birds to show up, and so
Yeah.
some birds need 500-600 miles, before they really turn it on. Some birds,
Yeah.
are better at the sprint or the middle distance. It just depends, and that's why it's nice to have a little bit of variety on your team of what can what can handle the day, because as you said, you have to be able to adapt. You guys were flying out of the West back then,
We'd fly out of the west one year, and then we'd fly out of the east the next year.
and that's in Texas or Washington?
In Texas, yeah.
Okay, Texas.
Washington, here where I live, we can only fly south.
Gotcha.
And the only reason for that is because you can't go west because you run in the Pacific Ocean. You go over the
Right.
Cascade Mountains, you run in the Pacific Ocean at about 120 miles.
That
You
makes
can't go
sense.
north because you run into Canada. You can't go east because you run into the Rocky Mountains at about 250 miles, and they're not going to cross that, or it'd be very difficult for them. And so we can only fly south or southeast. And there's a highway that goes dead south. And so it's just easier to haul the races dead south on 97, which is the same route that I take for my one loft race.
Perfect. Let's the other question I had for you before we move on to the Washington side of things from the Texas perspective is what was your preparation for breeding season? So Yeah, as you know, the AU ships out the bans in late December to where you can start banning pigeons if you wanted to in January. Were you medicating, vaccinating, doing anything in particular with the breeders? And were you doing any pumping foster parents? Was it just letting the breeders raise themselves? Were you getting any certain grits and minerals, feeding? What kind of process did you have for the breeders to be successful to breed you the type of young birds that can do what you were doing?
Nothing special. I'd vaccinate them for PMV about 30 days prior to breeding, and then run them on. Back then, I was using probably amoxicillin just to clean them out. I don't even think I was giving them canker, which really shouldn't, unless they're having a reoccurring issue all the time, because you want to let them build that natural resistance up to that. So really, the only thing I was doing is vaccinating them a month out, um, and um, and then a couple of weeks prior, I'd run them on amoxicillin. But since then, I've changed it to doxycycline. I liked it better. It's a more wide spectrum antibiotic. It's better stuff. That's really it, dude. Nothing special. Just lots of good time off, bass, sunshine, real important to them and stuff like that. Um, One thing that I will mention this when I was in Texas is, and I did the same thing here too, is in Texas, I don't think we started flying young birds till October, and
Right.
here it was September. So I would get birds raised real early in Texas because it was warm. It was a warm climate, so I could breed in November, December. Out here, I don't do that, but we'll get anyway. So I'd raise a bunch of babies, and then I would by June, sometime in June, I'd start hauling in birds down the road, or maybe it was May or June. I'd get them down the road, and I'd get them out to 60 miles real fast. I mean, because it was a flat course. I didn't have out here. You got to go around ridge lines, valleys, mountains, and stuff. So you got to be more careful with them. But out there, I'd take the birds a couple miles of first toss, then 5, then 10, then I think it was 15, then it was 20, 40, and 60. And within 8 or 10 training tosses, I had them at 60 miles, and they were coming good. So I'd have them go 60 miles 3 or 4 times. I think it was 3 times. And then I would go through and pull the flights on the birds. I didn't pull just 9 and 10. I pulled 8, 9, and 10. And a lot of times I pulled the tail too. So
Yeah.
my birds look like a bunch of quail walking around on the ground. And then, you go to, and then what I did was, um, 1st of August or so, whatever, mid-August, I'd start training them again, getting them in shape, and get them back on my celibacy system, showing the cocks and no, let me back up for a second. Let me correct myself. So while the birds are sitting on the ground like quail, that was when I would let all the cocks and hens mingle with each other and mate up, because I wanted that to use that later on to my advantage. And so while they're growing all their flights back in, I'd let them suckers mate up. Some of the hens would even start getting eggy and lay eggs and stuff. I never let them raise any babies. I've never flown widowhood, never done natural or anything like that. It was always celibacy. And then once their flights were pretty much grown in, it was time to start loft flying again. I mean, after 3 or 4 weeks, I'd have them suckers out flying again, and then I'd separate the sexes again, and then get them in shape for the races. So that worked really well. Out here in Washington, I don't have a heated loft. It gets real cold. My lofts are very airy, got a lot of wind through them. And I should breed a lot earlier to send birds out to one loft races, especially to some of the one loft races that support me. But um, I kind of, by the time I'm done shipping all the birds back around Christmas, and dude, I'm all pigeoned out. I mean, I need a couple months off. I just want to spend some time with the rollers, let them out in the backyard, enjoy them like I did when I was a kid, and not have to worry about, the one loft race business and racing
Right.
pigeons and all that
Yeah.
stuff, the grind of that. And so I don't typically make my birds up until middle of February. And that's kind of normal out here. A lot of guys made them up February 14th. This year I made them up February 16th. And I'm just starting to get babies out of the nest. And they'll all go out to late hatch races because they're too young for, these fall, these traditional young bird races. But But no, I don't necessarily do anything special for breeding.
Gotcha.
I should. I could tell you that's a downfall of mine. I'll admit that. I don't take as good a care of my breeders as I should. Um, I, because the one loft race thing, that's where it's at for me. Um, and I put a lot of sweat and tears into that. And my own pigeons, they take, they take the hit for that.
It makes total
And
sense, especially with the size of your race, as many pigeons as you're having to deal with. And correct me if I'm wrong, you may get a little help here and there from friends or family, but you're kind of a one man show on that race, right?
no, dude, I got people that help. Yeah, well, my wife and I, we run the race, but
Right.
I have employees that come and clean every day.
Okay.
If
Good.
it wasn't for them, I wouldn't do it because I mean, it is a lot of work to get in there and clean that loft every day. This year, my sister works for us. She's younger than me. She's in her 50s, and she kind of oversees what goes out in the loft. And we get some young kids that come and work for her, and their job basically is to make that loft spick and span every single day. And this year, knock on wood, our health has just been out of this world. I think we've due to injuries, illness, and all that stuff, we've removed less than 2% of the pigeons, which is kind of unheard of. Anybody that runs a one loft race is going to have some sickness, whether you want to admit it or not. Some of them will try to not admit it, but it happens because believe me, I talk to a lot of one loft race managers, and we kind of cry on each other's shoulders when stuff's going wrong. But no, I've got people that come out there every day, and their job is to scrape every little piece of pigeon poop out of that loft, and then they spray the entire loft down from head to toe inside the loft with Virkon S. And in years past, we've always used Virkon S on the perches and stuff, but we always use little hand sprayers. This year, I got these DeWalt pressure washer. I bought a couple of them, and you basically take a 5 gallon bucket, fill it full of Virkon S water, and then you hook the hose in it, and it sucks the water through the hose, and you can spray the whole loft. And we just stick it on a wagon that goes up and down the hallway, and the hose itself is long enough to be able to reach back into every nook and cranny of the loft. And I'm telling you, that's when you get a virus running through your loft, the best thing to do is spray that whole sucker down with Virkon S. And I know people in the past have got into trouble for mentioning using it in the water, but I can tell you that using it in the water is a valuable tool if you know how to use it right. It definitely kills viruses in the water. It cuts down your canker. It does all kinds of cool stuff. So we've used that periodically throughout intake. Anytime I see anything, then birds go on Virkon for at least a couple days just to knock it down, and that worked really, really well. And then other than that, they're on Primalac, and we're doing something different this year too that we started last year, which I wish we would have started earlier, but we're using lysine in the water. Have you ever heard about that
I
before?
haven't.
Well, you know how cats get the feline herpes virus, and their eyes get all gummy and their nose gets snotty, and if you ever had cats.
I do.
um, so I got to thinking a couple of years ago. I said, well, if it works for cats, it's got to work for pigeons. And so I started putting it in the water, and man, let me tell you, most pigeons, all pigeons have the pigeon herpes virus. And if you can knock that down and suppress that, then you're not going to have as many other viruses, and you're not going to have E. coli, paratyphoid, stuff like that pop up. And so when the birds are not being medicated, we're putting Primalac in the water with lysine, and it is just totally awesome what it does. I've told a few other one loft races. I won't mention them because they're competitive and they don't like to tell anybody where they get ideas from. But I told them about it, and they're having really good luck with it. In fact, I've heard them even mention in their videos they're trying some different stuff. It's lysine. You put a little lysine in the water, and that'll knock that pigeon herpes down, and then they won't get sick from all the other stuff.
And what is it doing? Is it boosting their immune system or?
Yeah, but what it does is it suppresses uh, herpes.
Yeah.
It's just like when you go when you get a cold sore and you go to your doc, what are they gonna give you? They're gonna give you a lysine.
Right. Okay. I'm with you.
I'm just giving it to them orally.
Right. Makes
I
sense.
was telling my sister the other day, I'm tempted to mix an 8 ounce glass and drink it myself and see what the hell it would do. It wouldn't hurt you. I mean, it
Right.
wouldn't hurt you. You can go to a health food store and get it. So I guess you
Right.
could drink it.
Right.
I've never tried it myself, but for pigeons, it's just wondered. So here's the thing, Jeff. When you look at when you're looking down the throat of your pigeons from from where the mandibles meet at, you look at the back of the throat. If they have something in there, white cheesy crap, it's canker. If it's forward to that, it's going to be it can be pigeon herpes virus, it can be chlamydia, it can be all kinds of that. Well, that can be on the back of the throat too, but um, pox, pigeon pox. If you get anything forward in the mouth, usually on the tip of the tongue or the bottom of the beak, that's pigeon pox. And so what we did this year is we started the birds on Vercon when they first come in for a week. Okay. And that pretty much, I think that knocked down everything. That killed all the viruses that the pigeons had, because in our quarantine cages, we use those crown cages that you can buy at most of the pigeon suppliers. That got 8 sides, four on each side, and a little water in the middle, and that's where we put the birds for a week when they first come in. And we put them on Vercon for 6 to 7 days when they first arrive, and then that just kills everything that they have in them that they're carrying, and then it's all dropping through the floors. Well, then all their cages and their trays and everything are disinfected every day, so they're basically in a sterile environment for their first week of being here. And then when we put them in the loft, that's when they go on lysine and Primalac. And it's I'm telling everybody my secrets, but I don't believe there are any secrets. I mean, I tell everybody what I do. Just like when I was racing in Texas, I told all those guys, come over and I'll show you what I'm putting in the feed, in the water, how I'm training, because I wasn't doing anything secretive. It's just, guys are too proud and they don't want to ask questions
Right.
in,
Yeah.
racing.
Yeah.
But as far as one off racing, it's such a uh, it's such a delicate business. So much can go wrong so fast that I think that those of us that have one off races need to share ideas with each other, and a lot of them don't. They
Absolutely.
yeah
No, I've had
they should.
I've had Jim Ward on and Tony Cuevas on, and they've been very open and honest. And one of the things I talked about with Jim that we were applauding you for was you posted a picture of somebody who shipped some birds in a box, and there was way too many in that box. And it was a really good, eye-opening post for people to learn that you can't ship this way and expect to do anything but donate your money. You're not going to be competitive when your pigeons are in that kind of environment. And it's bad for the birds. And so,
Oh, I can. Well, that's funny you mentioned that, because last year I posted a picture and I remember the breeder. It's a very well known breeder and he sells a lot of pigeons, and people put those pigeons in one loft races. I'm not going to mention his name, but he sent birds for a syndicate. And dude, they were jam packed in there. I'm like, there was like 15 pigeons. And we're like, this box should have like 4 pigeons in it. And there's
right.
15 of them. And a couple of them were dead. They're standing on top of each other. And I was pretty pissed about it. And
Yeah.
I called my friend who has a one loft race and he's in the syndicate. I said, dude, why are you buying birds from this guy? So same thing happened this year. I had some birds that died. I think I had 3 different boxes this year. And of course we had, I don't know, 5, 6, 700 boxes. So you get a couple, that's not a lot, but um, it's always the same. And I posted that on Facebook this year, and within an hour I had like 70 comments, and a couple one off race guys called and said, hey, I see you're trying to teach these guys a lesson, show everybody how they should ship and not ship, but you need to take that post down, because that's field PETA and people like that would have a field day with it. And I thought about it for about 30 seconds. I said, you guys are right. So I deleted it. But 2 years in a row, I posted pictures of birds dead in a box because the damn breeder overloaded the box, and Dude, it just baffles me. One loft race, man. I last year we had the cheapest race in the country. It was $250 a bird. You don't pay anything till after activation. This year we went up $100 because I wanted to get more money in the pot. I honestly I wanted to make a little more myself. My wife's complaining, going, "Why are you charging so little when you're one of the bigger races and we're not making a lot of money and we're paying everything up front?" So I said, "All right, honey, I'll do what you want." So we charge $350 a bird. Still, I think we're still the cheapest race. And even then, dude, I'm not a rich guy, but I'm not poor anymore. But 350 is 350. That's a lot of money.
Right.
Why are you damn packing your birds in a small box trying to save a little tiny bit of money on postage when you should be splitting those birds up and shipping them properly? I mean, the people that do really well in one loft races, I've noticed that they send them in big boxes, and they either use like pine straw or if people don't know it, pine needles.
Yeah.
I got that, picked it up when I was down south. They call it pine straw. Up here, it's pine needles.
Yeah.
Pine needles or straw. Put that in there so there isn't a lot of dust creation in there, and ship your birds. With just a couple pigeons in there. Because if you're going to pay, in my case of my race, $350 a bird if they make it through activation. I mean, why are you trying to save 15, $20 on shipping and shoving all these pigeons in one box? Just ship them in a couple boxes.
Yeah. I think
I mean, I can think of people in my head right now that do it improperly and some that do it properly. And I don't want to sound like I'm giving somebody a bunch of credit by mentioning names, but because I don't ever try to show preference in my race for certain breeders. I've
sure.
seen some guys say, "Oh, so and so sent birds, and here's pick." No, I don't do that crap, because then you're showing, some preferential treatment, and I don't want to be accused of that. But the people that do consistently well in one loft racing, they ship their birds properly. They ship them in big boxes with just a few birds, nice bedding in there for them. You see other guys that ship birds and there's absolutely nothing in there. I mean, just cardboard box, and these birds come with green, slimy pigeon shit all over them, and you get really irritated when you open the box. And another thing too about shipping pigeons to one-off races is I know that boxes have gotten more expensive because the dimensions that the Postal Service changed, the USPS. You need to have a lot of headspace between the pigeons and the top of the box. And a lot of guys are shipping them in these little bitty short boxes that
Mm-hmm.
are not designed for pigeons. And man, they get hot as hell in there, and the birds just look terrible. Now, and I will mention a name. I had Thomas Baldwin used to fly my race all the time. He hasn't flown for a couple of years. We had some problems, whatever. Okay. He sent me pigeons this year. When he shipped his birds, dude, they come in primo condition. Big boxes, just a couple birds in there, nice floor dressing, and they look fresh. They look strong. They look healthy. Take the same box, and another guy will stick 10 birds in there.
And that's
It
one
just
of the reasons
baffles.
that Baldwin does so well is he's shipping them
It's one of the
properly.
things. Yes, Gannis flew our race several years. Same thing. Johnny the Greek, same thing. Here I'm naming names. I said I wouldn't do it, but certain guys do that, and some don't.
Right.
And you get some guys that literally ship birds to you in a fortune cookie box, and it's for fortune cookies, and they'll cut little holes around it, and those boxes aren't even approved for the postal service. And hey, if you're going to go cheap like that and your post office is going to allow it, yeah, put a couple birds in there, but don't shove 10 in there and expect them to arrive in good condition and then be upset because your birds start falling off the inventory because they get sick and die a week or two after they get here because they just can't compete, man. They
Yeah.
you
Well, and
know
I think, like you said, studying the guys who are doing well at a club level and paying attention to the habits that they have, and then adjusting your own program to fit that and to add what you like and don't like about it. It's the same thing with the one loft, guys like the names you just mentioned are doing very well. So it would benefit people to hear what these guys are doing. And one of the questions I asked Jim Ward is, what do you as a one loft manager like to see when you open a box? What is the ideal box opening for you at the Apple Cup?
uh, like I said earlier, a good sized box would just, let's just simplify it. Fewer pigeons than the box is designed for. Lots of air, head space, and something at the floor. Either pine needles, which they call pine straw down south, regular straw, paper shavings is good. Don't use the real fine pine shavings, because what happens is the birds get to stirring around in there. It creates a lot of dust.
Dust.
And yeah, and I've noticed that when the birds arrive, if you've overpacked them, and especially if it's warm, then they come out with all kinds of respiratory issues. Their nostrils are all caked up, their eyes are all watery, and they're squinty. Their throats got so much crap in them, it looks like they got chlamydia or something in the throat. I mean, because they shipped the birds with some crappy shavings in there, or they didn't put any shavings in there at all. Some people ship them without, and the birds are just cut. And I hate that. They're just covered in pigeon shit. The band's got crap all over them. The feet are all caked up. You don't want that. You want them birds to come in really good condition. But, a perfect box for me, when you open the box, you don't feel heat coming up in your face,
Yeah.
you know, and it doesn't smell. There's no smell. When you open a box and it stinks like pigeon crap or urine, um, they didn't do it right. They put too many birds in the box, and they've got these short little boxes. Don't be afraid to spend more money and get a taller box. And if you're going to use the short boxes that are 12 inches tall, don't put too many birds in there.
You're right. So for those who are watching that may not be as familiar with the Apple Cup, let's talk about what time of year you're racing. Let's start with when you're taking birds. Obviously, you're finished for the year taking them, but then let's talk about what time of year you're racing them and the distance, because you have quite a few races in your race that you get for the 350.
Yeah, yeah. We in years past we took birds February, March, April, and May, and it just was too much. I mean, it was too grueling for us, and there's too many health issues that could be created. So last year we brought it down to just March and April. I said, okay, well, instead of 4 months, we're just going to do it 2 months. Well, hell, we got more birds last year than we ever got before, just in those 2 months. I said, well, so that worked. If they want the race bad enough, they're going to do that. So this year, same thing. We brought birds March and April. Is that right? Yeah, March and April. I just settled group 10, which was the birds that came in week 10 today. I just let them out this morning. And some of them are still out there piddling around, but so we accept birds March and April, and we get them flying around. My daughter's home from college. We'll go out there around June 1st, June 2nd, 3rd, whatever works out good weather-wise and all that stuff. And as long as we don't got anything going on, her and I will spend a couple days going through and checking all the birds, checking chips, pulling the 9th and 10th flight, and looking down the throat. Any of them that got anything in the throat, they get stuck in a separate crate, and then we medicate those separately. Now, I haven't seen a single pigeon this year with canker. I think it's because of us using the Virkon periodically. And I can honestly say we have not even cankered the birds this year
Wow.
at all. And I don't see any canker in the birds. I think the Virkon knocks it out. In fact, if you read an article that Frank McLaughlin still has online, it says right in there that, Virkon will have a beneficial effect against canker. And it's true, it works. I'm not saying you don't have to, you can get around not having to give them canker medication at all, but it does help. So anyway, yeah, we take birds March and April. We pull flights, check the chips and the health about the first couple of days of June, which we're going to do here in about a week, not even a week. And middle of July, I hope to start training. Unfortunately, here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a lot of fires,
Right.
forest fires.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of smoke in the area. So you got to be cognizant of that. It's quite frustrating because my buddies that have the Blue Bucket and the Crooked River races down there in Madras, Oregon, Lucas Kramer and Paul
Yeah.
Reuter, They don't have the same smoke issues that we have, but they do have it. It usually, slows them down too. But anyway, we get a lot of smoke up here. So providing it's nice and clear, we'll start training in July, and we'll train through August, and then we'll have the activation race around Labor Day weekend in September, and then hopefully we'll be done with the race middle of October, and I can get all the birds mailed back before Christmas. Um, you were talking about the activation race this year is 115 miles. Then the first race is 165. The second one's 250. Then there's a 300. What am I at here? 165, 200, 250, 300, and then a 375-mile final race. Now, we've always went 350 on the final, but this year I decided to go 375 because I want to try to get a little closer to 8 hours on the wing. I think that's important. I think a lot of breeders want to see that. I could have kept it at 350. I'm still getting, I mean, we had 420 breeders this year. I think we're the second largest race behind the Hoosier this year. If you don't count the Florida Pigeon Derby, the Florida Pigeon Derby finishes, next year, January, February, whatever. So if you count the whole country, we're the third largest race. If you count just races that finish within the calendar year, we're second behind the Hoosier. I don't really have any aspirations to try to do a big $1 million race because I'm not going to guarantee $1 million. I mean, I know how to do that. I know how I would go about doing that, but that's not my goal. My goal is to have a race that is affordable and that people that just want to test their pigeons can send birds to a race like ours. People that send birds to like the Hoosier, they're going in other races, and that's Jim Ward's a friend of mine. We talk, but people enter races for different reasons. Like they want to enter the Hoosier because there's a lot of money involved, and they want to try to hit that big jackpot. My race isn't set up that way. My race is set up to test the hell out of your birds and see who's got the best bird at the end. And if I had it my way, it would just be an average speed race. Period. We'd just pay out average speed. We wouldn't pay anything on the final. It'd just be whatever the top 50 or 100 birds, whatever we decided mathematically works out with prizes. I've thought about doing that. I think that I've even thought about doing it next year, to be honest with you, but we'll have to see how this year finishes. I always said that we would do this business for 10 years. This is our 9th year. Next year will be our 10th year. I don't know if I want to do it after that. I kind of want to enjoy my retirement. We haven't made a lot of money on this race because we're always putting money into the race, and we have employees now. But if I can make a good pot of money on this race this year and maybe next year, then I can see myself quitting, because my goal is just to get this damn house paid off. I get the house paid off, I can live on my military retirement.
Right.
I make pretty good on that. I make good enough for us to live comfortably. So if I get the house paid off, I might quit the one loft race business. But that's kind of my goal right now, is just to get this house paid for, and then that way I can fly pigeons the rest of my life, go back to club flying, and if I want to, enjoy my rollers. I have fancy pigeons too. I do it all, man. I go to the National Pigeon Show every year. There's a lot of racing pigeon people that have fancy pigeons, and they'll be there, and I get to talk to them, and we talk racers, we talk fancy pigeons. I do rollers, racers, fancy pigeons. I've judged pigeons. I fly pigeons. I just love pigeons.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I really appreciate about your race, and I think that a lot of the top races are doing this as well, but it's important, is that you have great communication. Anyone who follows your race on Facebook is able to see updates on what's going on. You're really good about showing us the loft and the birds, and when you're training, you have the releases that get shown, and your training and races in general, you're getting great returns. You can tell the birds are in good health, and as you said, it's a very difficult course with many different challenges, different landscapes they have to deal with, and so I've really enjoyed it. And 2022, I had the 39th ace pigeon at the Apple Cup, and she didn't win any money or anything. But I know that in that race, there was, I don't know how many you started with, probably over 2,000, 3,000 birds. So for her to be 39th ace pigeon was pretty incredible. So I brought her
Yeah.
back, and I started pairing her to some of my other one loft birds and some of my other breeders that I'm trying to prove out. And she ended up breeding a two times first and a 31st on the final at the Flying D race, and winning some money there. And one of her other children raced super up in Colorado for my partner Garrett in Colorado. So, I think that even though a pigeon may not win a race or hit in the money on a race, the fact that they are consistent in a race like yours with all the challenges we've talked about, that's a good pigeon. And so I appreciate all the training that you do and the updates that you do, and I think it's very well run. So I personally will be sad to see it come to an end, but I totally get it. I understand your perspective, and it'd be awesome to see you get back into club flying and doing all the things that you want to do eventually. But um, what is it from a one loft manager's perspective? What is some of the biggest challenges that maybe people don't understand about running a big one loft race with that many pigeons? What are some of the challenges you have?
Health, maintaining health in the loft. That's your number one. That's the number one challenge. Anybody that runs a one loft race will tell you that. And those of us that run one loft races and we confide in each other, they'll even tell you more. I mean, it's tough. That's the hardest part is keeping the damn birds healthy. Um, and people will tell you all day. They'll give you ideas. Oh, this is what I would do. And you want to be respectful of people, but when they make comments like that, the first thing I want to say, and I know other one loft races want to say, is, dude, have you ever ran a one loft race? Have you ever
Right.
tried? I mean, you know how many times you've heard of people say, hey, I bought a bird, I imported this bird and I had it brought in from Holland or whatever, put it in my loft and my birds got sick. You've heard those stories, right? Guy brings in one or two pigeons or he buys one at an auction. It could be a local auction, brings it home, his birds get sick. Well, think about what happens when you're mixing birds from hundreds of breeders. I mean, last year we had 600 breeders. This year we got 420. We upped our up the price and everything, which is fine with me. It's more manageable. Um, that's it. I mean, it's the health part. That's the
And
number one challenge. If you're just asking what's the biggest challenge, it's keeping them birds healthy. That's the biggest challenge.
And for a breeder perspective, to help you maintain good health, is there a certain curriculum or process that you would like to see breeders have, like certain vaccinations, certain age of a
Yes.
youngster? Because I know I've talked to other one loft managers who say, don't send me pigeons that are too young, that haven't had time to get an immunity built up, that aren't eating and drinking as well on their own.
Absolutely.
Is there a certain kind of age range and vaccination medication process that helps you, the manager?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, I think that's a good question. I'm glad you brought it up. In the pet, my daughter's putting a note, going to Walmart, buy. All right, bye. That's funny how to show that to you.
We can pause. We can pause. Go ahead. We can
No, no, no,
pause.
you're good. I'm going to show this to these guys. My daughter, I told my wife and daughter, do not disturb me while I'm doing this. What's it say? Going to Walmart, buy.
That's awesome.
Okay, so let me go back to that. What's the question again?
Well, I just was going over some of the ways that we as breeders can help a one loft manager by not sending babies that are too
Okay, I got
young.
it.
And yeah.
Okay, I got it. My head's back to me. Okay, so in years past, I think what kind of the common consensus was is sending birds when they're about uh, 42, 45 days old. That's where guys usually want to send birds. Um, I'm finding now, and a lot of one loft races are saying the same, that birds that are sent around the 60-day old age is far better. And because those birds have a stronger constitution, they have better disease resistance. They do, when birds get sick in a one loft race, or if a one loft race currently has an issue going on and it's still during intake, and you get these extremely young pigeons. that were overpacked in a box, dude, they don't stand a chance. They're going to die. I mean, a lot of them do. So, in a perfect world, what I would want breeders to do is, first of all, you need to be you need to take really, really good care of your breeders in the off season. Give them their vaccinations, take good care of them, make sure they're as healthy as possible. Supplements, do whatever you got to do. Get them birds healthy. If you're using fosters, treat them exactly the same as you do your breeders. They need to be just as healthy as your breeders. They're not just some birds you throw in a back loft and you say, okay, your job is to raise birds for my good ones. No, they need to be super healthy too, because whatever they have, they're going to pass through the cross crop milk and all that stuff.
Right.
So I like to see 60-year-old babies. I want the breeders to vaccinate their pigeons at 21 days old in the nest, 25 days, whatever. Vaccinate them again 3 weeks later, and then ship them to us 2 to 3 weeks after that. So when the birds get here, they're actually getting a third vaccination. Now, somebody's going to watch this video and say, I don't agree with that. That's too much. Well, I can tell you that I've talked to some of the people that have won my race or done extremely well. And they said, yeah, Rick, I vaccinated them twice before I shipped them to you. And then they were vaccinated a third time at your loft, because I don't have time to go through and vaccinate them a second time, because it's during intake, man. I mean, we still don't have time to stop and go, I got to go through and catch all them birds that arrived the first week or whatever and vaccinate them again. You don't have time for that. If you got a small little one loft race, maybe 500 pigeons, you can do that. But when you're at a couple thousand pigeons, we got 2,300 birds out there. I don't got time to do that. So I really, really need the breeders to vaccinate their pigeons at least once before they ship them, 2 to 3 weeks prior, not right before you ship. You can always tell when people ship them right before, because their back of their neck still got some type of stain or something on there, where whatever they used, iodine or whatever they used to spray. So yeah, 60-day-old birds that have been vaccinated twice before shipping, and or at least once, but preferably twice. And then and the last vaccination at least 2 weeks before shipping here. Don't overcrowd your boxes. Ship them in big boxes. Put some shavings or something in there, not the fine pine shavings, but big pine chips are good. The cedar chips, some people say it's really hard on the pigeon's lungs. Myself, I've got some breathing difficulties that I developed when I was in the military, and the pigeons don't make it any better. And the cedar shavings, it's like I have an allergic reaction to them. Not many people ship with cedar shavings. It's usually the big pine shavings, if they use anything, the chips, not the shavings, the chips. Yeah, that's basically it. Take good care of your pigeons before breeding season. Get them prepared for breeding season. The one that talks about that the most, Gert Kolvenbag, he does a really good job of preparing his pigeons in the off season, and then obviously getting birds ready for one-off races. But don't ship them when they're too young. Don't ship them when they're too old. Vaccinate them a couple times before they come here, or at least once. And don't overcrowd your boxes. Ship them on a Monday. Don't wait till late in the week. And it's not rocket science, man. It's pretty easy stuff.
Yeah. What advice do you have? This kind of piggybacks off what you just said, but what advice do you have for new flyers in 2024? Maybe even guys or girls that are coming back to the sport after a break. Like you said, you had to get out of pigeons during your time working in the military because you weren't able to devote enough time when then you came back. Maybe somebody who's watching this is new and trying to learn here in 2024. What would your advice be to them to get started the right way, and to either, whether it's club racing or if it's one loft racing, what is the best advice you can give somebody who's trying to start off successfully?
If you're club racing, I would say go visit everybody in the area that flies in the club, and see if you want to be just part of the crowd, which some people do. They don't really care they win or lose. They just want to be part of something. Go visit. But if you want to be successful at it, like I am, I'm a competitive guy. Go seek out the people that were doing all the winning, and then go compare them to all the other people that are doing all the losing or finishing in the middle all the time, and you'll see a stark difference. It'll just be night and day. You'll see it. You'll see the people that are doing it right are doing things a certain way, and the people that aren't are doing it another way. And just emulate the ones that are successful and listen to everything they have to say. If you don't have absolutely any knowledge about pigeons, then I really highly recommend. Hold on one second.
All right.
Well, I'm not going to dig it out. It's underneath a pile of crap. It's that flying, the Dr. Colin Walker's Flying Vet book. You probably got that one.
Yeah.
That is the best book out there. You'll learn so much about health. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. There's so many things that you need to do when you're getting started, but you should, before you just get all excited and decide to build a loft, talk to some successful breeders. You want your loft to face south. I prefer that you don't have a wooden floor in your loft because it can create an area where birds can you get a disease in there and it gets real hard to get it out. I prefer a wire floor so that all the crap can fall through and it's easier to keep the pigeons healthy that way. If you're going to want to run a one loft race, you got to have a wire floor.
Absolutely.
So it just, I mean, we could talk about loft design and all this other stuff, but if you're going to club race, just get in with the right people, if you know what I mean, and go visit them and visit a lot of lofts, look at a lot of birds before you decide what direction to go in. If you want to be successful in club racing, then go after the people that are winning in your club or in your combine. You don't need to go buy birds from the top. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars on birds. Go get birds from the local people if that's what your intentions are. Now, if you want to do well in one loft racing, then you need to go after the birds from the people that are winning in one loft racing, because obviously they have some genetic pool there that is superior to birds that weren't designed for that purpose. It's been said many times that people that were extremely successful in club racing decided they were going to do one loft racing and they lost their butt. They couldn't win nothing. Well, it's because in club racing, you're in charge of those birds. You're the one that's conditioning them and motivating them and everything. And you can outwork your competition. But in one loft racing, it's a genetics test and it's a health test too. It's just, there's a big part of it is health. You got to send healthy babies, and a lot of people don't. They compromise their pigeons during shipment, or the birds just weren't taken care of. I get birds in us one loft race guy managers. We talk about this sometimes. Who's this guy? Somebody from Oregon. What the hell was I? Where was I going with that? That threw me off with that phone call.
We were talking about sending them healthy youngsters.
Oh, yeah, for one loft races. So if you're going to get into pigeon racing and you want to get interested in one loft racing, you need to learn something about pigeons before you decide to just get into one loft racing, because there's a lot of people out there that go buy these birds, expensive birds, build a loft and expect to just start winning. And then they actually get mad at guys like me when their birds get lost or they don't do well. They're like, oh, it must be your fault. Well, dude, you can have the best birds in the world, but if you don't have the health right, you didn't vaccinate them, you didn't set them up right. I know what I was going to say. Sometimes you get these pigeons that are just ratty. I mean, they're covered in lice, or they got fret lines in them, stress. These birds were not raised properly. The nutrition was wrong. And then they sent them to one loft races. I got some birds the last week, and I know exactly what the bands look like. I'm not going to say, but those birds look like crap. I mean, I'm like, why did this guy send these birds?
Right.
I think some people, they're trying to ship pigeons, and they're trying to throw something up against the wall and see if it sticks.
Yeah,
And that's not the way to go about this. You have to be intentional in what you do. You
exactly.
have plans, and you have to have a plan. You have to stick to your plan. But um, it's when you go to meet people that have been really really good at one off racing or club racing, they kind of fall within a similar mold. And those that aren't, their personalities show that. So, it's all about attention to detail, fine detail, and all that stuff. But there is a difference between those that fly club and those that fly in the combine. I mean, one off racing. There are some that do both. I've done both. You've done both. Um, One thing that I've noticed is that most clubs around the country are kind of dying a slow death. The older guys are dying off or quitting. There aren't a lot of young people getting into it. There aren't a lot of middle class people or middle aged people getting into it, which was kind of the case in the past. Uh, you know, Young boys raised with pigeons growing up, and life kind of settles down, and the kids move out, and they say, "Yeah, I'm going to get some pigeons again." So they get into pigeons. You don't see a lot of those people migrating towards club and combine racing. But you do see what I've noticed is there are a lot of young people getting into one off racing because it's just the allure of it. It's exciting. There's videos online, it's social media. There's an opportunity to make some money here, not just um, in prize money, but selling pigeons too. You see a lot of marketing going on, people advertising their pigeons. You see, man, all you could spend all day long looking at pigeons for sale and pedigrees and people posting. You win a 50-mile training toss and guys are posting videos, or I mean, and and um, pedigrees, which kind of drives me nuts, to be honest with you. I don't get excited until it's 350, 400 miles. I mean, that's what floats my boat. Even a
Right.
300-mile race would mean nothing to me. But um, that it's just common sense as to why young people, young men especially, are getting into this, but they're not getting into one off racing, but they're not getting into club because there's just it takes a special kind of person to fly club. You have to really love the pigeons. You have to have this deep love for them and love of the sport. And you're not always in it just to win it. You just want to, you want to see what these pigeons can do from extreme distances and stuff. And that's fine. I'm that way. I love pigeons, man. If pigeon racing ceased to exist, I would still have pigeons in the backyard just to fly them and see them fly around. And I drink my coffee in the morning. It's cool. But these young people, they're not into it for a plaque or a trophy. Man, they want what's in it for me.
Right.
I
Right.
got young kids in their 30s. I know how they are. Um, what's in it for me? And the opportunity to win a bunch of money and to be part of something big, and to possibly have a pigeon that becomes famous by winning a race and selling babies and making a lot of money. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all, as long as it's done honestly. But that's why I see that the sport is transforming, especially here in North America, where we're so spread out and clubs are kind of, dissipating. But the one off racing, boy, it's taken off, isn't it?
It is. It's continuing to grow. There's more and more popping up each year because there's definitely money involved, and that's going to attract for good or for bad. But I think that you're one of the guys that does things the right way. You're very upfront and honest. You train well. The results speak for themselves on your returns, and it's a challenging course. So I can't recommend your race enough. And the final question I'll ask you here, and I love asking this question to anybody I have on because I love hearing about this. Do you have a proudest moment in racing pigeons, whether it's club or maybe a one loft situation that comes to your mind that was something that you'll never forget, a moment that you'll never forget in pigeons?
Huh. Um, well, in one off racing, that first year that we had our race, there's two there's one when I was flying in Texas, and one the first one when I was flying in Texas. Um, I had heard behind the scenes that some of the guys, they were going to have this, like I mentioned probably an hour ago, a meeting about the next race season, and this guy in Copper's Cove that's winning all the time, which was me. We need to try to figure out what we're going to do with him. Um, and I won that final race by 20 minutes. I shoved it down their throat. You know what I mean?
Right.
I shot 5 pigeons at the top 4 in the combine. And so that was my crowning moment. I said, okay, and I'm not a vindictive person. I don't believe in being vindictive. It's part of my religious belief and all that. I'm just not that way. But when they were talking crap behind my back and I I beat them outright, that felt good.
Yeah.
So
You let the
that was
birds do the
probably,
talking.
yeah, I let the birds do the talking. That was my crowning achievement as a club racer. That was in Texas. That was way over 10 years ago, 11, 12 years ago. Anyway, one loft racing. I would say it's probably that first year that we had our race in 2015. I started off with 551 birds and got 350 or something to the final. I can't remember the exact number. I'd have to look it up on Wing Companion. But I remember I told everybody, if you're going to come about 1 o'clock. And so that I could set everything up. And I was barbecuing and all that crap. Well, the guy that talked me into starting a one loft race was a guy named Bob Brummagem down in Oregon. He used to fly by American Lofts. Probably still is called American Lofts, but he used to sell a lot of pigeons around the country and around the world. And we were part of a forum, an email group, a Yahoo group that actually Ken Easley started. And it was called the Royal Racing Group. And you know how guys are. They get in there and they bitch and complain about this and that, all this stuff. Oh, if I had a one loft race, I could do it better. I was one of those guys. I was like, well, this is what they should do, and this is what they should do. And one day, Bob says, Rick, you need to shit or get off the pot. And I'm like, okay, Bob. So I went out there and I started building a loft. And my wife's like, what the hell are you doing out there? Why are you building another pigeon house? I said, I'm gonna start a one loft race. She's like, what is that? And so here we are 9 years later. We got a much bigger loft now. That loft only lasted 1 year. We had to get a bigger loft. Anyway, so Bob Brummagem came to my final race, and Terry Gilmore, the guy that does Wing Companion, they came to my house. They showed up about an hour early, and I was kind of pissed. I was like, why are you guys here so early, man? I'm not ready for visitors yet. And they're like, we just wanted to get here early. And Brummagem, this old curmudgeon, and he's even more of a curmudgeon now. He goes, you're not going to get any birds today. I'm like, why? He goes, it was raining the whole way here. I'm like, and my heart just sank. I'm like, are you serious? He goes, yeah, Rick, it was raining the whole time. And I was like, shit. And so everybody else starts showing up at 1 o'clock, and we're waiting until after 2:30 or something. Speeds start getting kind of low. I can't remember what winning speed was, 1,200, 1,100. And all of a sudden, these 9 pigeons came, and it was misty out. It wasn't raining hard. 9 pigeons came, and I had the loft facing the wrong way that year because I had my rollers facing south, and I had the race loft facing north. And 9 pigeons came, and I went, man, they shot straight in the trap. I think I got all 9 in within 7 seconds or 9 seconds or whatever. That was pretty rewarding. And I was like, got the monkey off my back. And then it was about 45 minutes later before we got the other birds. And when the other birds came, they just started pouring in. So that was rewarding. I'm gonna tell you, I can't really put that was a rewarding experience. I told you 2 of them, but I think what's rewarding to me most of all is, I haul all my races. I don't trust anybody to haul my races.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to earlier about you. Is you kind of do
Yeah,
that yourself. You're a one man show. You haul your. So that's what I was referring to earlier.
yeah. Lucas Kramer with the Crooked River, he has a really good race too. I consider it one of the best, if not the best, as far as the way he does things. I mean, that guy's got OCD really bad. He's worse than me, but and we talk about that. But he hauls his own race. He's not real big on the big party at the end. I always, my motto is it's about the pigeons, not the party. I'm
Right.
not going to plan around a party. If you plan around a party, then you screw up because you get a whole bunch of people coming. You're obligated to race them on a day where you probably shouldn't. So I like that flexibility of being able to say, hey, I'm looking at weather and I'm going to have the race this day. If you want to come, come. But I always haul the race, and almost every year the birds have beaten me home by just a few minutes, or they arrive right when I'm showing up in the driveway. And what's rewarding is when you get a bunch of your peers in your backyard and these birds are just pouring in. They're just pouring in, and that you had control over those birds. They're coming home from 350 miles, and this year will be 375. When those birds are just pouring in, and everybody's like, man, how in the hell do you do that? I mean, how did you do that? I mean, when I flew in the club here in this area, I did really well, but there's nobody there to see it. And when you get a bunch of people in your backyard and they see all the work you've put into it, and then these birds start pouring in and they're trapping good, they're like, you want to pound your chest a little bit, and you're like, man, and you feel like it's finally over. Oh
Right.
my God, it's finally over.
Right.
I put all these, 35, 40 training tosses and 5 or 6 races, whatever it is. And this is it. And now all we have to do is worry about, well, then it gets interesting after that. You got to mail them back and you got to
Yeah.
collect check, send checks out, all that. But yeah, I think the most rewarding thing for me in pigeons ever, racing pigeons, running a one loft race, is just being there for the final race and having those birds pouring in, having birds show up every minute for an hour or so. There's some people who will say, well, yeah, Rick, but your speeds are too fast. I'm like, what are you talking about? My speeds are always, 1500 or lower. Some years it's been 12s. And I always say, look, if I want to slow the birds down, it's real easy. I just won't train them as much. I can slow the birds down like any one loft race. I just won't train them that much, especially before the final race. You see a lot of one loft races, they'll rest the birds up for 2 or 3 days before a race. Well, of course, there's going to be a bunch of separation on the final. I got too much pride in that. I want to show what I can do with the birds, and I want to give every bird the same opportunity. That's why I
Right.
keep them in tip top shape. And I usually I'll train right before the final race. I'll train them right before the final race, give them 1 day rest, and then we go. Very rarely will, and sometimes I've given them 2 days rest. Another little trick is too, if you're training them like every other day, then you give them a 2 day rest. They've got lots of strength, because they're not used to that. So it's like they got extra energy to come home. So I do that too. But the year that I was second in the President's Cup, I was also second in rollers in our national 11 bird fly, and I was second in the 20 bird fly, and I qualified for the World Cup finals that year. That was the proudest I've ever been. I think that was in 2012, because I was second in the world, or I was second in the AU, the President's Cup. I was second in the 11 bird fly in the whole country. I was second in the 20 bird fly in the whole country, and I qualified for the World Cup that year.
Yeah. That's
That was pretty
incredible.
cool. I don't
That's
think
incredible.
anybody else will ever do that.
No.
I've thought about going back to club racing just so I could see if I could do it again. But if I do, that'll be in the future.
Yeah.
So
Well, that'll be awesome, and I'm excited for the race this year and to see what becomes of it in the future. I know you're one of the best, so I appreciate you coming on. If people want to find out more about the race, what's the website?
it's applecupyc.com. And it's YC because the first year it was a yearling classic. The first two
Right.
years it was a yearling classic. So it's applecupyc.com. And you can find a lot of information on there. But if you want to talk to me on the phone, or give me a text or something, it's 254-247-9504. I love to talk pigeons. When it's during intake, I don't talk on the phone very much.
Busy.
Guys want to call, and I'm like, look, just send me a text. Tell me what your loft name is. What's your problem? If I can't solve it with a text, I will call you. And but in the my wife will tell you in the wintertime, I'm on the phone all day long talking to some pigeon guy. Either I'm talking rollers or racers, and periodically somebody talking about fancy pigeons. You know, I see you got a turbot or something in the background. We use them for droppers.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, I actually
Oh
got that
yeah,
from
turbot.
got this from Steve Martis at CBS.
Oh, I've been to CBS. I was at, we got cousins that live in Oklahoma City. So we went up there, 12, 13 years ago and stopped. Actually, I talked to Rick when Rick was there running it before Steve took over.
Yeah, Steve and Rick
Yeah.
are two of my favorite people in the sport. They've been very big
Yeah.
fans to me. But and you, like I said earlier, you do great videos. So if people want to see the videos, it's on Facebook and it's under your name, right, Rick Mee? Or do you have a Apple
Yeah.
Cup
It's just under my
specific
name.
page?
Yeah. I've had people try to encourage me just to start an Apple Cup page, but I got so many people that know where it's at. So I like I like when I enter one loft races, I like to see what's going on, you know, and
Do
I'm not
same.
really good at doing, I'm not real computer literate. I'm not tech savvy, but and you had to help me set up this Zoom call here, but, um, um, you know, I like to talk about pigeons and if I enter one loft race, I want to see what's going on. And I
Exactly.
don't need to see every single step. I don't need to see every day. I just want to, especially training tosses. I want to see a couple training tosses to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. But it is imperative that you video every single race. You've got to do that. You got to do that to cover. I've got to do that to cover my butt, and
Right.
I've got to do that to show the breeders that I'm releasing the birds where I'm supposed to be releasing the birds. I know some white races have put GPS trackers or something on their vehicle. I don't. There's no necessity for that. If you're videoing your release and showing, hey, this is where I'm at, and many of you have been here before, and you know where it's at. So you know, birds get released. You're where you're supposed to be. That's real important. Of course, we know, and you know, years past, we don't need to name any names or races, but there's been races caught, uh, you know, releasing them short and doing
Right.
this and that, and you know, man, that's just bad. You can't do stuff like that. So, but I'm real leery of races that don't show anything.
Yeah.
You know, they don't show nothing.
Yeah.
But I try to show enough to let people know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and of course the races have to be released. You know, or I mean, video. That's a must. You know.
Well, all right, Rick, I appreciate your time. And I think that there's been a ton of information people are going to be able to learn from on how to get better in multiple aspects of the racing pigeon game. I think that it's going to be impactful, and I really appreciate your time and I appreciate your service and for your career there in the Army. We just had Memorial Day weekend here in the States for those who are watching overseas, where we honor those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. And so I appreciate you and those like you that do what you do and did what you did. And so thank you for coming on. Thank you for giving us your time. And I hope people that aren't as familiar with your race will check it out. And so I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, man. It's been a blast. This is the second interview that I've done in the last couple months. I did one for Rollers a couple months ago. It lasted 2.5 hours. Those guys were like, Rick, we got to cut it off. I'm like, man, I'm just getting going, you know.
Yeah. Well,
I can talk pigeons all day, man. I love talking pigeons, you know,
I'm
but
definitely going to want to have you back on. Maybe post the race is over.
sure.
We can talk about how it went and some of the trial and error you
But
go
yeah,
through. And yeah, so
well, if it does crappy, I'm probably not going to want to talk to you. You know, no, I'm
well,
just kidding. Hey,
yeah,
whether good or bad, you know, I'm here for scrutiny. I don't care. You know, hey, if people got questions or whatnot, then I'm willing to answer them. I mean, I don't. I try to be as transparent as possible. You know, even then people will say, "Oh, why aren't you showing this and that?" I'm like, I show like, I try to be as transparent as possible, so that way people know that I'm doing what I want to do. I know this race isn't for everybody because it's a tough course, and this course eats birds up. But I can guarantee at the end you're going to have some good ones, man. You know, and something that you mentioned earlier, I know you're trying to wrap this up, but something you mentioned earlier I think is really smart. You said you brought back that bird that was what, 35th average speed or
39th
30
Ace
something,
Pigeon. Yeah,
39th
2022.
pigeon. years ago when I first got into one loft racing, some of the top dogs in the sport that we all know, they said, Rick, one of the best pieces of advice they could give me was to bring those birds back from one loft races and put them in your breeding loft. Now, if they did decent, they don't have to be the top bird, but as long as they did decent, they were consistent, and you feel like you can get something out of them, because what those birds do is they pass on their natural that disease resistance that
Absolutely.
they've built up, and you have to get that in your gene pool so that that way when you send birds off to one off races, they have a high retainability rate right from the get-go and through activation. What happens after that, we don't know. Some of that's luck, some of it's just superior genetics, inferior genetics, but get those birds back. A lot of people, like in the past, when I finished a one loft race, if a bird didn't do real good, I'd be like, oh, hell with it, keep it, I don't want it. But I've learned to bring all those birds back, even the ones that do bad, because when you start handling them and feeling them, you're like, okay, well, these best birds, they all kind of fit within a similar mold, and the ones that are not as good, they kind of oddballs or whatever. So it helps you make decisions as far as breeding goes.
Yeah.
In the future, I'm not one of them guys that'll go in your loft and start handling all your pigeons, going, "Oh, this is junk. This is great." No, I want to see tail sign through the trap. That's what's important to me. I bred from some pretty gaudy, ugly, you know, not perfectly shaped pigeons, and they bred great birds because there's something we can't see. That's the bird's desire to get home and the engine within that pigeon. And if
Yeah.
that pigeon, just like that big Kloss cock, the only reason that bird did so good on that day is because it was windy as hell and it was a big bird. And I knew that that bird had some determination in it. The pigeon didn't know any better, it's just flying instinctively, but it had an engine that I wanted to take and put into a smaller model, and I
Sure.
did. And so
Sure.
that's why I think it's imperative that people bring birds back from one loft races, look them over, breed from your best ones. Maybe the other ones, use them as fosters. Don't just discard them. Um, but for health reasons, you want to get those birds back from one loft races so that they can pass on that disease resistance to the youngsters that you're going to be sending to one loft races. And also, if you've done well in one loft races with birds off a particular pair, send birds back the next year off that same pair, full brothers, sisters. And then if you've had birds do good in one loft races, take the birds that did good, breed off of them, and send their children back to those same one loft races. That's the way to attack it.
It's a
And
horses for
guys that
courses
do
type of
that, they
thing.
do really, really. Guys that do that, they do really, really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of them. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's
Well, no,
that's
no,
what I
that's
have to
great.
say.
That's awesome. I agree with you 100%. I've said this on the show before, and I told Jim Ward this, but my number one breeding hen right now flew at the Hoosier in 2021, and she had one really super race, but otherwise she was pretty far behind. In fact, on the final, she came in the next morning. So when I got her back, I wasn't too excited about the prospects of breeding from her, but I went ahead and tried her out. And her first year of breeding, she bred the uh, first Oklahoma Hall of Fame young bird. And then the first time I sent out to a one loft out of her, it won the Texas Center Summer Convention. And then this past winter, daughter of her won the winter convention. And then this old bird, she bred the ace pigeon of our combine and old bird. So just because she didn't win the Hoosier, she made it through. She survived the Hoosier when there's thousands
Yeah,
upon thousands of birds. And she has, this is what Ed Menville at Seagulls always talks about when I've heard him speak, is that your pigeons, you have to think of their immunity as a backpack that they pass on to their youngsters. So I think she's passing a really good backpack of immunity onto these youngsters that seems to be able to help press them forward. And so, sometimes pigeons can be super breeders and maybe not quite as good as a young bird. Maybe if she had flown again as a yearling, she would have been a superstar yearling. We just don't know. You need a young bird that's going to develop quickly in these one lofts. But
yeah,
I think, like you said, get those youngsters back from these races and breed them and see if they do pass that on and send them back to the races where they've had some success. And I think that's incredibly good advice. And the last thing I'll say that you were talking about earlier about not caring about if they're beautiful or not. Rick Martis, when I had him on, was talking about whenever they would sell the Gabby Vaninabills, that he would have trouble selling them because they weren't the prettiest of pigeons. But as we all know, that's one of the top bloodlines in the world, results wise, across the world. And so, it is very much important to pay attention to what's working and not so much about what you're feeling in the hand, I suppose.
Yeah, and Ed, I've listened to Ed Minville speak twice at seminars, and he is a plethora of information. He's a guy that I go to talk to. I've got a fellow service member, Kyle Martin, that started the Louisiana Perch this year,
Yep.
and he's in Louisiana. And I told him, dude, the best advice I can give you, because I've been talking to Kyle for like a year and a half about starting a one loft race. So he mentions me a lot in his videos because I kind of pushed him, but he wanted to get out of aren't you in real estate? You said
Yeah.
that's what he was doing too, and he wanted to get out of real estate and he wanted to have his own business. And I said, dude, start a one loft race. So he did, and I said, you gotta stay in Ed Minville's hip pocket because
Exactly.
Ed knows health inside and out. He's really really good. And so he's a good source of information. Another thing too is you said, like sometimes you get these birds back from one loft races. They weren't the champion bird. They didn't even win any money, but they're worth trying. Like this year, leading into the final race at the Florida Pigeon Derby, I had the 25th average. I think it was 25th or 26th average speed. It might have been 23rd. It was 20 something average speed, and it was only like 8 minutes back. And I said, man, this bird's going to do good. Its sister did good in the spring break. I just know this line of my birds, and the bird did terrible in the final, and I was upset. I was like, man, if I had any pigeon that was going to win, it was going to be that one. And so I had won $1,000 in the race. The first race won $500, and one of the other races won $500. We had $1,000. And I had three birds finish the series, and I told Brito and Pedro, I said, hey, just put all my birds in the final, man. I mean, on the 400, put them on the optional. And so while they were sorting through the birds, the bird that I had, I think it was 2265, I might be wrong. Anyway, they called and they said, hey, Rick, this bird's got a hurt wing. I'm like, well, that makes sense why the bird didn't do good on the final, because it
Right.
had a hurt wing. And so that's a plug for the Florida Pigeon Derby. I was really, really impressed that those guys took the time to contact the breeder to let them know, hey, I'm not sending this bird to the 400 because it's injured. And that was, to me, that means a lot.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to take that pigeon and I'm going to breed from it because I know what its siblings did in other one off races. I know how it was doing, and it looked like it was on an upward trend. And it's unfortunate it got hurt before the final and wasn't able to do good on the final or the 400. But birds like that are worth trying, just like that big red bar cock in Texas I flew that did good on that one race. And it was just kind of a miraculous thing that it did, flying in a crosswind like that.
Yeah.
Um, those pigeons are worth trying. But having said that, I much more prefer pigeons that are consistent throughout a series than a bird that just finishes and wins at the end, where maybe it was, if there's 3,000 pigeons in the race, it was 2,500 on the 300, but then on the final, it comes in the first drop. I'm like, I don't know about that bird. I want one that's consistent. I know we're about ready to wrap this up, but you're in Oklahoma, right?
I am. Yeah. I'm in Tulsa.
Okay. So you're aware of that pigeon 2216 that Rex had in his race, the Sooner Challenge, the one
Right.
that won the last four races? Well, I
Hmm.
have that pigeon now. I
Oh,
bought
wow.
that bird. And that's a badass bird. That is the kind of pigeon that you want.
Right.
Those are the kind I'm after. But I'll still try out a pigeon like that one that was 25th in average speed in the Florida Pigeon Derby that came home with a hurt wing, like the big red bar cock. A lot of this stuff's just instinctive. You got to give
Yeah.
them a chance.
Right.
Give them a shot in the breeding loft. They don't breed good birds. They don't breed good birds. But in my dream, my goal is for if I ever sell a pigeon, and I don't sell many, but when I sell a pigeon, that the pedigree is going to show winter to winter to winter to winter all the way through. That's what I like. I like birds that breed, that flew good and breed good. Those are gems. And you don't get a lot of them that breed good and or I mean flew good and breed good at the same time. But those are the ones I want. That's what
Yeah.
I'm trying to fill my life with.
Yeah, they're
So
rare and they're definitely what we're all looking for. And you have to keep your eyes open and continue to adapt. As you said earlier in the interview, you got to be able to adapt and adjust and figure it out as you go, because you can't just write it down and it all go according to plan. These aren't robots; they're
no,
animals. So
hey, dude, that's what I always say.
yeah,
I always tell people they're not robots; they're animals.
right,
And I especially say that with rollers all the time because they
right,
expect them to be robotic. They're not. They're animals, and you got to know how to make changes to suit them. You know, to get the best out of them. You
right.
know.
All right. Well, I've taken enough of your time, Rick. I appreciate it, and we'll have you back on again. You're fun to talk to, and there's probably 10 more things I could go into, so we'll save it for the next one.
Hey, write them down, and we'll do it, brother.
Yeah,
After the final race.
yeah,
Now, if you do bad on the final race, I don't want you to chastise me. Yeah. But no, I was joking. I'm just joking.
right,
Hey,
right.
win or lose, or if they do good or bad at the final, we fall flat on our face. I'm more than welcome to come back. I'm more than willing to come back on here and talk about what transpired because I just think we all learned that way, and it
Yeah,
makes me,
absolutely.
you know, I'm not
Yeah,
going to go hide my head, put my head in the sand if we have a bad race. But the way the health looks this year, and the things I've learned over the last 8 years prior to this ninth year, I think we're gonna have a really good series this year. I hope to get started earlier so we're not racing in November, December like we have in the past, because that just sucks. I mean, it gets cold here, the roads get icy,
yeah,
and I know that's been one of the complaints about our race by some people, mainly people that live in warm climates and don't understand that the weather can change here on a moment's notice.
right.
But you know, my goal is to get this race over with by mid-October, so that way I can get the birds back to people across the country before Christmas, and then they can breed them for, you know, to send birds out to one loft races for next year. You know,
Yep, that's perfect. And good luck this Saturday with your rollers. Hope it goes well. Hope you're back on top the
yeah,
next time we see you and talk to you. So,
trying.
all right. Rick Me, Apple Cup, and one more time, website.
AppleCupYC.com.
That's where you can find him. And then add Rick Me on Facebook if you want to see some of those awesome video updates that you do. And thank you again for coming on. And
It's
everyone's
been
going to
fun.
enjoy this one. So, all right, Rick.
Thanks, Jeff.
All
Love
right.
it, man.
Thank you.